Okay, midweek edition of the Morning Pitt here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Chris Pete from Panther-Lair.com. You know the website, Panther-Lair.com. Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Football, basketball, and recruiting. You can find it all at Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, message boards to interact with hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans. All day, every day, Panther-Lair.com. The message boards are humming, and people have lots to talk about, so you're a Pitt fan, you like to talk about Pitt sports, you want to find out what's going on in Pitt sports, the best place to do it is at Panther-Lair.com. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Of course, we have our YouTube channel here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. That way you'll never miss any of our exclusive Pitt video content, these daily morning Pitt videos that we do every Monday through Friday, or our Wednesday night live show like we're doing tonight at 8:30 p.m. We do it every week. And then any other videos that we might release, either practice highlights or post-game press conferences, or if there's big news breaking and we want to go live, we'll talk about it right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So hit that subscribe button, hit the like button on this video, and hit the subscribe button, and make sure you never miss any of it. Of course, you can turn on notifications so you get an alert sent to your phone anytime we go live or anytime we release a new video. You don't want to miss anything that we do here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That's the way to make sure you don't miss it. You click the subscribe button and you will be tuned in for everything we've got. So it's Wednesday, May 3rd. The transfer portal is officially closed. It's been closed for a few days, actually, in case you forget how it works. I mean, it's not 100% closed. I guess you could still go in if you were an undergrad looking to transfer. But the way it works is if you play a fall sport and you want to play in the coming fall, you need to enter by April 30th. You need to put your papers into the school by April 30th in order to be eligible to play in the fall. Now, I think grad transfers have a little bit of wiggle room. I think they can pretty much go anytime they want, which I'm all for. But just as an aside, when we talk about guys being able to transfer multiple times, like Keaton Slovis did like a second transfer, or Phil Dracovic does a second transfer and they can play right away. Well, it's because they're grad transfers. And personally, I think, and this is sort of what the NCAA has done, I don't think there should be any restrictions on grad transfers. I sort of look at grad transfers as guys who did what they were supposed to do. They spent at least 3, usually 4, sometimes 5 years at their school, mostly 3 or 4 years at their school. And they went to school and they finished all their classes. They finished all their credits. They got their degree. They graduated. They put the student in student athlete. So let them do whatever they want. If they want to transfer and play right away, go ahead. If they want to wait until the day before the season to transfer, whatever they want to do. I don't think there should be any restrictions on grad transfers. I'm a big fan of grad transfers. You did your time. You went in, you did your schooling, you passed all your classes or enough of them to get a degree. You filled up that other part of it that, we're going to hang on to for as long as we can. The idea of being a student and the academic side of things really mattering. We're going to hold on to that as tightly as we can until it finally fully slips away. But in the meantime, we're going to reward to some extent, but reward the kids who actually go out and get it all done. The kids who graduate from college should be able to go. When they want to go, they should go. And so I'm all for that. Grad transfers can do it. But undergrads, guys who are not grad transfers, who want to play in the fall, need to be in the transfer portal by April 30th. Now, we waited until Wednesday to talk about this for a few reasons. I wanted to talk about some draft stuff over the last 2 days. But the way the process works is the player submits his paperwork to the school, says, hey, I want to transfer. Here's the papers. The school then, it's the school who actually puts the kid in the transfer portal and makes his contact information available and all that stuff. The school has 2 business days, 48 hours, basically 2 business days over a weekend, if there's a weekend involved, 2 business days from the time they get the papers to put the kid in the transfer portal. So I waited until today because now it really truly is effectively closed. The 30th was Sunday. So I guess in theory, if a kid submitted his papers on Sunday, 2 business days would be Monday and Tuesday, so maybe something could come out today. But I'm fairly confident that we can talk about this as more or less a done deal of guys leaving. You'll remember last year, the Jordan Addison stuff came out on a Friday night. I forget what the date was. I should have looked this up. Let me scroll back through my calendar back to it was either April or May. Yeah, so it was the 29th was a Friday. All right, and that was when the news started coming out. I just remember this because I went to New York City that weekend. I took the family to New York City, sitting in the Pittsburgh International Airport where our flight to Newark had been delayed like 3 hours. And I'm sitting there eating terrible airport food, and I start getting text messages about Jordan Addison going into the transfer portal. So I think he put in his papers either that day, Friday the 29th, or Saturday the 30th, but then the school had 2 business days, so they didn't really put him in the portal until like Tuesday the 3rd. So that's the way the whole process works. So that's why you see, like, I think it was later in the day, Monday, Sam Vanderhaar. News kind of came out that he had gone into the transfer portal. I think he tweeted it late Monday night, but he was already in at that point. And so you see some news come out after that deadline of the 30th. But now by this point, by the 3rd, I think everybody who's in, or everybody who's going to go in, is in. Now, obviously, players can still leave the transfer portal, and coaches continue recruiting transfers, and they'll keep trying to add those guys between now and the start of the season. But if you're going to go into the transfer portal, now is the time. You need to have done it by now. And the guys who are going to leave, I think we know who they are. And so I thought on today's episode, we could talk about all the players who are leaving Pitt post-spring. Because post-spring is really that time. It's sort of one of those benchmarks on the calendar. I think we often talk about it. We toss it around. Fans talk about it. Media talk about it. We say, well, we'll see what happens after spring camp. We'll see what happens after spring camp. We'll see who goes into the portal after spring camp. And you got, roughly 2 weeks or so, second half of April, to make that decision. Most of these spring camps tend to end around, like Pitt, there's spring game on April 15th. So you got 2 weeks to figure out whether you want to stay for another year or you want to go into the portal. And you would tend to think at the end of spring camp, 5-6 weeks of camp, 15 practices, you pretty much know where you stand. You know where you are on the depth chart. You know what your playing time opportunities are going to look like. Guys can make a jump in August in training camp and move themselves up the depth chart, but you probably have a pretty good idea of what the path ahead of you looks like, whether it's clear for playing time or whether you need to look somewhere else for another opportunity. And so we often say that. We say, let's see what happens after spring camp. Let's see who goes into the portal after spring camp. Let's see who does this or who does that. And, last year, it is kind of funny that the Jordan Addison thing sort of slid it. We were all watching to see if Nick Patty would go into the transfer portal by the end of April. And while we were watching that, Jordan Addison just kind of slid right in the DMs there and popped out into the portal without anybody noticing or expecting it. But so you spend those last couple weeks of April watching to see who looks at their situation, looks at the depth chart and says, I'm just not going to get an opportunity here. I need to find it somewhere else. I need to go into the transfer portal. And you watch for that. So I thought on today's episode, we could talk about all the guys that Pitt has lost post-spring. I mean, they had a number of transfers before spring. About 10 guys went into the portal before spring camp, tried to, they made that move, so they could get enrolled in another school and participate in spring camp there because it gives them a leg up, kind of like guys like Phil Dracovic and Vare and Dejon Reynolds and Donovan McMillan and all these guys and Derek Davis. They wanted to get here for the spring so they could take part in spring camp and get an extra, as many extra practices and reps and film sessions and all that as they can heading into the season. You give them a better chance to play and play well in the fall. But so we've talked about those guys, those 10 who left before the spring, those 10 who left, in between last season and the start of the spring semester. But I thought today on this episode, we could talk about all the guys who have left since the end of spring camp, since we sort of have a grand total of it. So the list, and here we go. This is what we'll talk about today. It's Miles Alston and Sam Vanderhaar. Crap. We've only been doing this episode for like 9 minutes. How am I going to fill the next 11 minutes talking about Miles Alston and Sam Vanderhaar? Look, I think it's pretty remarkable that they only had 2 post-spring departures. I really do, because particularly right now, you end up with a pretty full spring roster. In the past, you would have 50, 60 guys maybe on scholarship on the spring roster. Now you end up with a lot more kids enroll early, you get more transfers, and so you're filling up more of those 85 scholarship spots in the spring than you did in the past. And so I would think more guys come out of the spring with a clear idea of, hey, I'm number 1 on the depth chart, I'm maybe number 2, or I'm actually 3 or 4. And those guys who are 3 and 4, I think we tend to expect them to jump. You know, we tend to expect them to say, I'm a third-year player, I'm a redshirt sophomore or whatever, I'm a redshirt junior, and I'm not any higher than 3 or 4 on this depth chart. I got to go, man. And maybe I got to go down a level. Maybe I need to find a Power 5 program that has a hole that I can fill, but I got to go. I want to play, right? I only have a couple years left. I want to play. And so you expect significant attrition, more than 2 guys. But that's all they've had. Just 2 departures after spring camp. Miles Alston and Sam Vanderhaar. Vanderhaar is not a huge surprise. I mean, he was clearly behind Caleb Junko and Jeff Yerk, the transfer from Elon. It was clear to see that watching practice. And it was made even more clear when Andre Powell and Pat Narduzzi both said it explicitly. You know, that these are our top 2 punters, Junko and Yerk, not the guy who was the starting punter last year in Sam Vanderhaar. And it's too bad. There was part of me that thought that Vanderhaar would get better over time. Kirk Kursadulu, if you recall, came in redshirted a year, still wasn't very good as a redshirt freshman, but got better over the course of that season, and then ended up being pretty solid for the next 3 years. And so I thought Vanderhaar could follow a similar path. He unfortunately did not have the opportunity to redshirt. He stepped right into the role, didn't do well. I think he would even he would tell you that the season didn't go well. But I thought he would improve over time. Well, if he's going to do it at another school. And I think Junko's a good punter. I think Yerk looks really good. The transfer from Elon, I think, you know, he looks like a really good option. So I'm not too surprised about Vanderhaar when he was clearly number 3 at best on the depth chart. And look, we actually, one of the few things we actually get to see in spring camp is the like punting drills. It's one of the things they do early in practice, early enough that is before the media gets kicked out. And I don't know. I mean, I watched 11 practices, I think it was. 12 practices, somewhere around there. I'm not sure I saw Sam Vanderhaar punt once. He might, maybe once or twice in there, but it was all Junko and it was all Yerk. So you understand it. I mean, Vanderhaar looks, he sees the writing on the wall. Maybe he doesn't even need the writing on the wall. Maybe he has sort of explicit and direct conversations with Andre Powell and Pat Narduzzi and says, this isn't my spot. I'm not going to get that opportunity here. And so he goes. You know, we wish him the best of luck. Miles Alston, a little bit closer to the top of the depth chart than Vanderhaar was. Not a first-team guy, but very much a second-team guy. You know, I mean, I think a quality backup, a decent backup. He was getting some rave reviews, or at least some positive pub in spring camp. He even came out and talked to us. He did a post-practice interview, which under current protocols, post-practice interviews are chosen by the coaches. Pat Narduzzi chooses who we talk to after each practice and who we interview. And he chose Miles Alston for one of those post-practice interviews. And so I think that is a sign that he was having a good camp. I mean, Narduzzi doesn't send out guys who, you know, I think he feels like it's a reward for good plays. You come out and you get interviewed. And that was what Miles Alston did. And so I thought that was a sign that, oh, he must be having a good camp. But he goes through the 15 practices. He goes through the spring game where Kanate Mumfield and Dejon Reynolds are out, and he still feels like he's just splitting reps with freshmen like Israel Polk, and Lamar Seymour. You know, he's clearly behind Bub Means. He's clearly behind Kanate Mumfield and Dejon Reynolds. Those are your top 3 guys. And so Alston's probably looking at the situation and saying, am I far enough ahead of Seymour and Polk that if they bring in another transfer receiver, which I think I know they're trying to do, and I think they'll be successful at doing. He says, am I far enough ahead of those freshmen that if they bring in another, transfer, I'm going to still be in line for 4th or 5th reps. And maybe he says, I'm not even interested in 4th and 5th reps. So he transfers. I think he went to Old Dominion. Am I right about that? Let me double check that real quick. Yeah, he went to Old Dominion. And so looking for a better opportunity there. Again, good luck to him. But only having 2 guys go is really interesting to me. Because the other guys on scholarship, it's not like they had 61st and second teamers or 71st and second teamers, which I think is probably what they had. They had about 70 scholarship guys in spring camp, I believe. And they weren't all first and second team guys. There's a lot of guys there who were third team, fourth team, and not just freshmen or redshirt freshmen, but some upperclassmen, third-year players, fourth-year players who are down the depth chart, and yet they're staying. And I think there's a couple of different things you can look at, a couple of different ways you can kind of slice it up. Part of it is culture. Yeah, I think at this point they've built a pretty strong culture in that locker room. When you have 85 scholarship players and 100 and some total players, somebody's always going to be disgruntled. You can't keep 110 college-age young men happy all the time. Even the ones who are getting a lot of playing time, you can't keep them all happy all the time. So you're always going to have some disgruntled figures and some guys who are going to, say negative things. And we've seen that in the past with players who have left or been dismissed or transferred out. They've had some choice comments. But I think you're always, I don't think there's a perfect locker room anywhere. But I think the culture does seem to be strong enough, and the locker room and the chemistry seem to be strong enough at Pitt right now that they are holding on to guys. They've had less transfers leave the program this offseason than they had last year. Last year they had 17. So far this year they've had 12, and that's including Olsen and Vanderhaar. And like I say, the transfer portal is effectively closed for guys who want to play in the fall. So unless it's a grad transfer. So maybe you see somebody go who's graduated and doesn't feel like they're going to get the playing time, but otherwise pretty much looks like a dozen. They're not losing guys, not the way other programs are. I think Pitt is doing as well, if not better, than most programs in the ACC and around the country in terms of player retention. I had somebody say this to me the other day that, player retention is undervalued right now. It's all about what transfers can you get and not nearly as much about what transfers or what players, I should say, are you holding on to. And you look down the list of the guys Pitt has lost. Like here are the 12 transfers out this offseason. Keaton Slovis, Vincent Davis, Jaden Bradley, Jalen Barden, Gavin Thompson. He was a scholarship wide receiver. He went to UNLV. Miles Alston, Kai Wright, John Morgan, Sam Williams, Khalil Anderson, Judson Townder, and Sam Vanderhaar. Now, you have a few two-deep guys there. Bradley and Barden, I think, were two-deep receivers. Alston was going to be a two-deep receiver. John Morgan would be a two-deep defensive end, but we've talked about that situation a number of times. Judson Townder was a backup strong safety last year, but might be a similar situation to Morgan, where it's a question of, do you want to take that extra super senior year, potentially at the expense of some of the younger players who might say, I don't really want to stick around. If this guy's back again and he's going to eat up snaps, I don't want to wait my turn anymore. Coaches always say about being patient, but there's a ceiling on that. And there's a limit to how much patience that a player could be expected to show. And the coaches, I think, have to make a decision of, do you take one more year of that sixth-year guy at the expense of losing 2 or 3 years out of that younger guy because he might transfer. If he says, there might be a young DN that says, oh, John Morgan came back. So now there's one more guy that's going to take up the snaps that I was hoping to get this year. I think I got to go somewhere else to get the playing time I feel like I can manage and handle. So you had a few there. But as you look down that list, I think there were guys that, kind of left under those circumstances, kind of almost had to go because they weren't going to be able to do their super senior year at Pitt because they needed to kind of clear out to make room for the younger players to step in. I'm not sure who the biggest miss is in that group. And we can actually talk about this tomorrow, I think, on the Morning Pitt of what transfer will you miss the most. There's no Jordan Addison in that group. There's really not. They held on to a whole bunch. And I think player retention, like I say, I think it's an undervalued commodity. And I think it's an undervalued, effort by coaches to hold on to guys, to not have a mass exodus post-spring. And we don't even have to talk about Colorado level things. I mean, you just look at programs across the country. Guys are leaving post-spring. Guys are leaving in the offseason. And I think Pitt has had less of that. I think there is a good culture. And, this is probably where, and it gets mocked by a certain segment of Pitt fans, but I think stability is part of it too. There were no coaching changes this offseason. and minimal coaching changes last year, right? They changed the receivers coach. And that was it, right? Taekwon Underwood replaced and the offensive coordinator. So you replaced 2 out of 11 coaches, including the head coach. Or counting the head coach. You have 10 assistants, 2 coordinators, 8 assistant coaches, 1 head coach. You replace 2 out of 11. That's pretty strong, and you're keeping the head coach in place. You're keeping most of these position coaches in place. I think the stability plays into that. Guys like to stick around with coaches they know. And so I think you've got a good culture. I think you've got a strong locker room. And I think you've got stability in the coaching staff. And all that contributes to a pretty strong, solid foundation of a team and of a program. And like I say, don't sleep on the value of player retention. Holding on to guys and not letting them. And there's a lot that goes into that. I mean, I just listed some of the factors. Obviously, NIL is something at play as well. But I think, Pitt should get some credit, as we're giving Pitt a lot of credit this week for the draft picks. We should get some, Pitt should get some credit for what they've been able to do in terms of roster construction, maintaining a roster year to year, and not getting, totally decimated by the portal every offseason, or at least not getting decimated this offseason. So kudos on that. Of course, we'll keep an eye and see if any grad transfers go in or anything like that. But for now, 12 departures dating back to, and that's when I say 12 departures, it's 12 departures from the 2021 roster as it was, or 22 roster, 2022 roster as it was at the beginning of the season. So we're including like Jaden Bradley, who left midseason, Jalen Barden and John Morgan, and those guys who left at the end of the year. So pretty good. 12 departures, 6 additions. That's probably, that seems to me like a pretty good spot to be in. I think if you annually have about 10 to 12 transfers out and 5 to 7 transfers in, 6 to 8 maybe, I think you're, and then, the rest of your scholarship spots go to recruits. I think you're in a pretty good, that's a healthy relationship with the transfer portal, I would think. A healthy relationship with the portal. All right, tomorrow we'll talk about transfers out and which ones hurt the most, who they'll miss the most from this year's group, and things of that nature. Of course, don't miss tonight, the Panther-Lair Show, live at 8:30 p.m. right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Should be a lot of fun. We'll have a lot of things to talk about. Your comments and questions will go in a chat screen right over on that right side of the screen. So make sure you tune in for that and bring your comments and questions. Let's talk a little Pitt sports tonight, 8:30 p.m. on the Panther-Lair Show. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as we always ask, and then check out Panther-Lair.com for all the latest Pitt sports news. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Hope you've had a great week so far. Hope your Wednesday goes really well. We'll talk to you tonight on the live show, and then we'll catch you in the morning for the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.